Chapter 23. The Battle of Naho Bay. Jalla twisted to avoid the ramming thrust of a Levok headplate. As it wound up for another attack, he seized the brief opportunity to circle around its body and plant 2 slashes against its side. The Bohrok retaliated by snapping its clawed hand shield, which Jalla deflected before it could connect. The Bohrok pressed forward, snapping and swiping its hand shields and auxiliary limbs at the captain. He was forced back as he dodged the first 2 attacks and parried the third. He slashed against its leg before shouldering another swat of its shield that knocked him to the ground. The creature raised its cloven foot over Jalla's head, but he rolled from its path as it came down, cracking the wood as it made contact. Jalla slashed across the Bohrok's face as he hopped to his feet. While it was stunned, Jalla bore down 2 more swift slashes, the first of which severed its arm at the shoulder. Still, the Bohrok continued to fight. Jalla was pushed back on the defensive, as it rapidly churned out a sudden succession of thrashing attacks with its claws and pecking head. He blocked and deflected each strike, but his fortitude weakened with each one. When he finally felt the first pause in the assault, Jalla pressed forward with his own barrage. The Bohrok blocked the first few slashes before he landed a hit on the side of its face and knocked it off balance, which allowed him to deliver another. The Bohrok raised its hand shield and sprayed a stream of acid that was inches away from Jalla's body when he leaped from its path as it melted through the platform. Jalla grabbed the Bohrok's wrist to point the stream away from himself before staking his sword down through its back. The weight of its metal body dropping to the ground caused the already weakened platform to crack. Jalla heaved against the handle of his sword until the blade finally ripped out of the downed creature's carcass. There was now one less Bohrok to worry about. He scanned the area to see all the guards stuck in similar conditions. The Bohrok had touched down on Ga Koro, and the village was under total invasion. The Matorans still greatly outnumbered the Bohrok, but more and more were being fitted with flight krana and hovering over the bay, gradually evening the ratio. Nearly all of the villagers had been removed from the square and directed by the Turaga to the fishing docks to be evacuated. The narrow bridges connecting the village together made this a slow endeavor, but the guards ensured the invading Bohrok were held back long enough to reach the docks.
Is that all of them?
Jalla asked as he reached Hewkii, who had just used a spear Maku had tossed him from the guard's armory to skewer a Korok.
I think so,
Hewkii replied, yanking the spear from the fallen Bohrok.
So how many do we get to kill before we decide it's time to jump ship and join the evacuation?
All of them. We aren't losing this village.
I was hoping you would say that.
Make every effort to keep them away from the docks, Jalla said before pointing toward a group of guards that had just finished dispatching 2 Levok. You 4, spread out and search the homes. Make sure all the villagers are on their way out. Go now!
Yes, sir!
The guards affirmed his order and dispersed to separate corners of the village. Jalla began searching the nearby buildings when he heard a scream coming from one of the houses. He came across a Ga Matoran trapped inside the small shack, unable to escape due to the Korok standing in the doorway. She was forced against the corner as the Bohrok sawed its way through the home. The shrieks of its own saw blades and the distressed Matoran prevented it from noticing Jalla sneaking behind it. It was finally clued in when the tip of his blade sprouted out of its chest. The Bohrok fell dead to the ground at the captain's feet when he tore the blade from its back. Come on, Jalla said to the Ga Matoran, motioning for her to follow him. She nervously stepped out of the corner and kicked the dead Bohrok in contempt before taking Jalla's hand. Out at the docks, Turaga Nokama and Onewa were escorting the villagers into the fishing boats for transport across the bay. Between the Ga Matoran and Po Matoran, the total tally of inhabitants in need of escape neared 4,000. The larger vessels were filled up first and packed so tightly that their speed was heavily hindered. The smaller dinghies were loaded with so many Matoran that the pulleys that lowered them into the water creaked and strained. The largest ship in the docks had managed to transport more than 60 Matoran at once, making its return a high priority each time it was set out. Many of the more athletic Ga-Matoran offered to simply swim across the bay, but were shut down by the Turaga's orders. The guards that held back the invasion on the other side of the village fought hard to buy as much time as needed and keep the damage sustained minimal. The process was grueling. As the sun was beginning to creep out from the horizon, the remaining villagers waiting on the docks gradually dwindled. But all the while, the Bohrok were slowly pressing through.
This one is full,
Turaga Nokama called out, signaling for the next fishing boat to depart. She turned to the crowd for a brief head count to see nearly half still remained.
Single file! Single file!
Ordered Turaga Onewa. Jalla hurried across the bridge following the Ga-Matoran he rescued. Once he ensured she had joined the larger crowd at the docks, he weaved his way through it until he found Turaga Nokama. All of the houses are clear, Turaga. Everyone made it to the docks.
Excellent work, Captain. We just need you to buy us more time to get the rest across the bay.
We're on it. Once everyone's away, we could use a few of those boats to switch to the offensive. If we could reach the things switching out their krana, we could keep them out of the village.
We'll be sure to finish this as quickly as we can.
Jalla pushed against the crowd to rejoin the fight at the square. The densely packed Matoran tried to grant him easier passage, but the overpopulated docks provided almost no room for adjustment. As the sun rose higher, Jalla could see out toward the beach, where more and more Bohrok of varying breeds had joined the swarm, including more of the smaller assisting creatures that followed them. The guards holding off the ones reaching the village were becoming overwhelmed, and the Bohrok had begun breaking through their defense and wreaking havoc on the other platforms. The rate at which the crowd at the docks was depleting was alarmingly slow. Jalla finally reached the bridge and was able to make his way back to the square. Before he reached the other side, he realized he was being followed. Hahli! What are you doing? Get back to the docks!
I'm not leaving, Captain. I need to stay and defend the village.
We have this covered. You need to get yourself to safety.
I can see that swarm out there too. You need all the help you can get.
No, I don't want you to get yourself hurt, Jalla replied as he was beginning to turn away. Get out of here! Hahli grabbed Jalla's shoulder and held her ground.
When volunteers were being gathered to fight at Kinanui, I wanted to join them, but I decided not to. I convinced myself that it wasn't my place, but I regretted that decision every day.
Hahli, 26 Matoran died at Kinanui.
I know that. I knew some of them too. I just think that maybe if I had been brave enough to go, I could have helped. Maybe things would have been different for some of them.
Or you could have joined them. I don't have time to argue with you.
Then at least I wouldn't be remembered as the one that sat on the sidelines all her life. This is my home, Captain. Let me help save it.
Okay, let's go. The guards at the square were forced to spread out as more of the flying Bohrok began touching down across different sections of the village. This stretched their defenses thin, allowing fewer Matoran to focus on each single target. Attempts were made to fire arrows at the supporting creatures from across the water, but the distance was far too great. The Matoran were trapped, and were forced to endure the invasion until the rest of the villagers were evacuated. Meanwhile, the Bohrok that remained at the beach buried their hand shields into the damaged cliffside, rattling the rock and causing it to crumble into the bay. They climbed across the debris, chipping away at what was a breathtaking landmark only hours prior. Sections of the formation sank inward as a group of Nuvok joined the swarm and compromised its foundation. Hahli followed Jalla through the village as he assisted the guards in taking out Bohrok. Hahli did very little to help due to her lack of training or experience, which made her frustrated with herself. She took every opportunity to aid the guards that had been knocked to the ground, or make attempts to minimize the damage that the Bohrok caused while the others fought them. But each time she caught herself backing off whenever another Bohrok would engage, she became increasingly discouraged. She wanted nothing more than to serve her village and the island as a whole in a more fulfilling way than making flax string. Jalla and the nearby guards worked together to finish off a Leavok, just as they were given word that the evacuation had neared its completion, and multiple boats were available for the counterattack. Jalla ordered all the guards in his immediate area to make their way back to the fishing docks. When they crossed the bridge, he found the area to be far less crowded than it had previously been, with only a few small clusters of villagers still waiting beside both Turaga for their turn to depart.
Heads up!
Called one of the guards. Jalla had begun hoisting up a small fishing boat from one of the pulleys when a group of Bohrok had broken through the defense at the square and reached the docks. Before they had even acknowledged the Matoran present, they began tearing apart everything in sight. The Turaga rushed the escaping Matoran into the vessels, while the guards held back the Bohrok. Jalla targeted a Leavok that was distracted, spraying its acid over a small supply shack. He slashed across its back, causing it to cease its stream. When it regained its balance, it spun around and swiped its claws, which the captain quickly deflected. The Leavok raised its hand shield and sprayed an acid stream toward him, which he narrowly evaded. The stream ate through the boat pulley that stood directly behind him, which caused it to collapse. Jalla hurried out of its path, but felt the rope snag against his ankle. He was suddenly yanked to the ground as the tall wooden beam slid over the side of the dock, which knocked his sword from his hand. He made a desperate attempt to reach the weapon and cut himself free, but fell short as he was forcefully dragged over the edge and into the water.
Jalla!
Hahli cried out. The few guards that noticed the captain's peril over the chaos of the battle were too bogged down battling Bohrok of their own to come to his aid, leaving it to Hahli to be the one to save him. She finally found her purpose in the fight. She would be the one to dive in and save the captain, something that she was confident she could do, but she needed to act fast. Hahli darted across the dock. She built up a running start, but was forced to cancel her charge and slide to the ground when her path was blocked by the very same Leavok that destroyed the pulley. It eyed her attentively, as it stood in her way, watching for her next move. She was running out of time. She knew Ta Matoran were not known for their impressive ability to hold their breath underwater like the Ga Matoran were. She needed a way through. Hahli found Jalla's sword lying beside her foot, and snatched it up before she had even decided what she would do with it. But she soon came to the realization of what she would need to accomplish.
Imagine it isn't there.
She whispered to herself under her breath as she squeezed the handle of the sword.
Like cutting through open air.
The Leavok hissed as it raised its hand shields. Hahli charged forward as she wound the blade back. When she was in range, the creature thrust its head toward her, leaving its long and thin neck open for a split second. She avoided the ramming strike just as she followed through with a clean and precise swing. She felt the rough vibration of the blade tearing through the metal of the neck joint, and the Bohrok's head dropped to the ground, beating its twitching body by a full second. Hahli quelled the surprise she felt over her successful feat, and dropped the blade beside the dead Bohrok before resuming her charge toward the captain. She sucked in a deep breath and positioned herself into a dive before she speared through the surface of the water. The clarity of Naho Bay made the objective of spotting Jalla an easy one. The beam that he was tethered to had already reached the bottom of the seabed, and he drifted deeper with slowing movements. She swam downward until she reached him, but was unable to discern how alert he was of her presence, as it was clear his consciousness was fading. She grabbed his hand and used it to pull herself down further to untangle the rope from his ankle. Once she slid his foot free, she secured his waist underneath her arm and made for the surface. When she reached the lower section of the dock, she pulled herself onto the solid platform, dragging the captain out of the water and rolling him onto his back. Jalla opened his eyes after coughing out the eruption of seawater that had found its way into his lungs. As his blurred vision began to sharpen, the first thing that caught his attention was the pair of violet eyes amidst the dripping silhouette kneeling over him and holding the sides of his mask. When his focus finally returned, he surveyed his surroundings in search of his sword, noticing it lying a short distance away beside the headless body of a Bohrok. He looked back at Hahli, wondering what she would do next to continue to impress him. A swiftly passing shadow wiped over them, catching their attention amidst the heat of the invasion. Hahli pulled Jalla to his feet and he retrieved his sword. To their surprise, a host of Lee Koro Gukko pilots circled the air, swooping down and clawing into the invading Bohrok. A grand assortment of colors streaked across the sky as they plucked the surprised creatures from the docks and tore them apart. At first, the defending guards were just as stunned as their enemies, but quickly snapped back into action to take advantage of the distraction. Jalla and Hahli looked out toward the beach. They could see a sizable collection of green figures emerging from the top of the destroyed cliffside and firing arrows toward the swarms on the beach below. Atop the cliff, Kongu released his bowstring. The arrow traveled far before finding its place within the shoulder of a Tanakh. Standing by his side, Temeru fired into the center mass of a Nuvok, which caused it to snap its head toward the top of the cliff before returning its attention to the village in the distance. While the Bohrok were distracted by the Limatoran archers, they were attacked from behind by a full regiment of Usselry guards scuttling in from the old Fusa path, followed by a storm of crossbow bolts. Onepu led the charge on top of his own armored Ussel, clearing the way for Nuparu to stomp onto the battlefield with his repaired and upgraded Boxor, which was escorted by Taipu. Together, the reinforcements shredded down the Bohrok's ranks before they began fighting back.
Where did they all come from?
Hahli asked. Jalla smiled. Takua must have requested their help. Uniting the Koro seems to be what he's best at. The Bohrok and the village fought back, but their divided attention between the Gukko pilots and the guards defending the platform cost them their edge in the battle. Hahli followed Jalla as he moved to eliminate the ones that remained along the fishing docks. By the time he had finished and regrouped with the Turaga, all the Bohrok that had touched down in Gakoro had been destroyed. The four of them anchored their feet as a forceful gust of wind expelled from the wings of a Gukko that floated to a landing beside them, revealing Turaga Matau as its pilot. He swung his leg over the highly decorated saddle and hopped down onto the dock with a satisfied grin behind his mask.
The nasty bad beasts are now on the receiving side of the cleanse.
Matau!
Onewa exclaimed.
When we heard what happened to your village, we feared the worst.
I didn't. I knew you'd find a way out of it. Nokama didn't believe me.
In dark truth, the mind grip of the Bohrok made us ache long for death to release us. But the Limatoran have been will-freed, and we shan't toss waste the chance to make right sure none others need suffer as we did.
It's good to see you're all right, Turaga, Jalla said after glancing out to see the battle still raging on the beach.
And you came just in time. Now we can switch to the offensive. We can win this, but it's going to be tight. We need to hurry.
Back on the beach, the Bohrok were caught in a vice between the Limatoran archers from above and the Usselry guards on the ground. The Bohrok Voss scrambled to fit their nearby allies with the proper Krana to combat the assaulters as they were slowly demolished. The Ussel crabs overpowered many of the Bohrok head-on, using their armored carapaces to sponge their ramming attacks. The Limatoran failed to bring down more than a small few of them, but not for lack of skill with their bows. Many of the Bohrok that stomped through the battlefield were burdened by one or more arrows planted in their joints and armor gaps that they were forced to ignore in hopes of countering the attack. Takua rode Puku up to the edge of the sloping cliff beside the Limatoran and scanned the scene below. Now that he had gathered the help of the Limatoran and Usselry guards, he needed to find a way to provide further aid to their efforts. He briefly considered the risk of going down to join the heat of the fight before forming a far better plan. He steered Puku around the archers and climbed over the edge of the steep, near-vertical slope of the destroyed cliffside. He found a loose boulder that remained of the Cow statue and directed Puku to push it free. The giant rock broke from the cliff, picking up speed and momentum as it rolled down to the beach and streaked a line of crushed Bohrok across the sand until it came to a stop near the water.
Good job, girl. Let's find another one.
Nuparu tramped through the sand, easily smashing and tearing apart the Bohrok that approached his boxer. He used the machine's bladed claw to lance through the Tanakh, just before it had the chance to release its flame jets, and then used its impaled body to bludgeon a Galak beside it until the blade came loose. He swatted an advancing Bohrok off its feet before punching through its chest. He was rammed from behind by a Korok, which nearly caused the vehicle to topple forward. He regained control, ensuring it stayed upright, but the Korok had latched onto its back before he could pivot toward it. It fired up its saw-blade shield and began cutting into the mess of wires and hoses that sprouted from the chassis. Nuparu was unable to reach the Bohrok to pry it free, but was saved by a nearby Usselry guard that fired a crossbow bolt into the creature's skull. He felt the weight of the Korok slip from the boxer, but quickly realized the machine's left arm had been disconnected from its controls.
The backside remains insufficiently armored,
Nuparu muttered to himself.
Noted.
Onepu charged his Ussel toward a Galak. The Bohrok folded itself and rolled around the Rahi's body before springing open. Onepu fired his crossbow to prevent it from striking, which allowed him to turn the Ussel toward the enemy. The Bohrok pounced forward, tangling itself between the claws of the giant crab and locking each other into a struggle for dominance. With the Bohrok now closer, he drew his short spear from his saddle and jabbed it into the Galak's eyes. It pulled its head away from the tip of the blade, which exposed its neck to the crab's pincers. Onepu's Ussel mount secured a grip and dragged the Galak, kicking and screeching to the ground, allowing the captain to deliver a finishing shot. The Gukko pilots swept over the beach, delivering support to the Usselry wherever they could. Their presence further divided the attention of the Bohrok, who were now being attacked from 3 different angles. The few Bohrok that remained fitted with flight chrono took to the skies to battle the Gukko, but their slow speed and poor maneuverability prevented any of them from lasting long enough to even attempt a single strike before they were ripped from the air. Realizing they stood no chance this way, the Bohrok Va ditched their efforts to provide flight chrono and began focusing on granting them strength and shielding. The results were immediate. The Bohrok that had been fitted with shields had become impervious to the Gukko's swooping attacks, while those with strength were given far greater edge in the skirmishes with the Ussel. The Lematoran archers caught on to the shift and made the Bohrok Va their primary focus, but many Bohrok had already been refitted with new chrono by the time they had been eliminated. The Ussel were forced back, with some of the great crabs being killed and wounded by the force of the Bohrok's attacks. The Gukko's failed attempts to snatch the shielded enemies put them in range of the destructive hand shields, leaving many of them with burns of fire, acid, and ice that hindered their ability to fly altogether. The Matoran held their ground, but the rate at which the Bohrok were subtracted from the fight slowed considerably. But while the creatures regained the advantage, most of them failed to notice the fleet of fishing boats beaching the shore.
Remember the standard practice, Turaga,
Jalla said as he readied his sword.
Yeah,
Turaga Onewa replied.
Support only. Don't get too bold because the island can't afford to lose us. How about you mind your own business?
Don't worry, Captain,
said Hewkii.
We'll keep them in check.
The Matoran readied their weapons and leapt from the side of the boat. Jalla led the charge with Hewkii, Maku, Hahli, the 2 Turaga, and the entire Pokoro and Gakoro guard behind them. Even with their advantageous abilities, the Bohrok struggled to withstand the sweeping wave of new opponents. Many fell to the blades of the guards before regaining their foothold in the battle. With nearly 300 Matoran freshly added to the fight, the Bohrok had become noticeably outnumbered. Nuparu steered his boxer to the side to shield his body from the spitting acid of a Levok, which had no effect on the machine's surface. He twisted back to face it and smashed its headplate in with the one working arm. He reset it and engaged an approaching Korok, but when he slammed the arm forward, the Bohrok threw up a shield. The blades of the arm bent from the impact, and the creature was left unharmed. It dropped its shield, only to raise it again for Nuparu's second attempt. This time, the boxer's arm joints cracked upon the impact. With both arms inoperable, the machine was little more than a walking cage. The Korok pounced onto the chassis and rammed its head forward, bouncing off the visor shield. Nuparu broke off the control stick used to operate the left arm and jammed it up the Bohrok's upper jaw. Once it fell to the sand, he climbed out of the boxor.
Someone get me a crossbow! I'm still doing my part!
Onepu fired a bolt into the back of a Nuvok to catch its attention. His Ussel braced as the Bohrok folded up and rolled toward him. When it reached them, it revealed its possession of a strength Kana as it sprung open and swiped its claws with such force that the giant crab was flipped onto its back. Onepu was thrown from the saddle and tumbled across the ground. Onepu pushed himself onto his hands and knees and spared a moment to catch his breath. He looked up, finding the Nuvok standing still as it anticipated his response. Once his now injured Ussel had managed to turn itself upright, Onepu climbed to his feet and slapped its backside, directing it to flee. He picked up his crossbow and loaded another bolt. He fired it at the Nuvok's headplate, which coaxed it into a charge. He dodged the thrust of its head and used the crossbow to block a swipe of its hand shield, which caused the weapon to snap in half. He scooped up the short spear from the sand, avoiding another strike in the process. He sank the blade into the Nuvok's side, which caused it to hiss and stagger. It swatted at the Usselry captain, making him release his hold on the embedded blade as he was thrown to the ground. The damaged Nuvok stepped up to him and slammed its headplate into Onepu's chest. A sharp crack snapped out as every scrap of oxygen stored in his lungs was ejected. He choked and coughed through the metallic taste that filled his throat as he made eye contact with the Bohrok. He found no trace of emotion in its eyes as it reared its head back for another strike. Just before it delivered the next blow, its attention was caught by Taipu calling to it from behind. It whipped around, turning its skull directly into the tip of his pickaxe. It slumped into the sand as Taipu wrenched the tool free before throwing it to the ground and rushing to Onepu's side.
Nuparu!
Taipu cried out across the beach.
Somebody help!
Jalla finished off a Tanakh that he and Hewkii worked together to combat. As they pressed up the beach alongside Hahli, Maku, and the Turaga, they were forced to become more creative in their tactics, due to the specialized Kana that almost every remaining Bohrok wore. Still, they inched toward victory with each slain enemy. With their supply of arrows running low, the Limatoran archers followed Kongu's lead and headed down the cliff to join the fight up close, which further hastened their progress. With more than 5 Matoran for every Bohrok, the invading creatures began to fight like caged Rahi, making final efforts to slow their defeat. They were handled with such caution that many of the individual clashes turned into tense stalemates before the Bohrok were taken out from another direction. Soon the allies surrounded what remained of them, rounding them into a dwindled crowd with arrows, bolts, spears, and crab claws trained on them. Jalla raised his sword. After ensuring all had taken aim at their captives, he forcefully swung the blade downward, giving the signal to execute. The Matoran fired their weapons, snuffing out the last of the swarm in a sea of arrows and spears. The arrow-laden Bohrok announced their demise with a chorus of screeching as they dropped into a heaping pile. When the noise died, the Matoran lowered their weapons. The crescent beach of Naho Bay had been converted to a graveyard of mangled Bohrok, spent arrows, and scattered chunks of rock and dirt. Matoran and their Rahi were sprinkled throughout the mess, dealing with injuries they sustained. Jalla assessed the battlefield, but his focus gravitated toward Hahli, who was conversing with a group of guards. Although he was hesitant to allow her to join him, her insistence ultimately paid off. He was relieved to see she was uninjured. Jalla sheathed his sword as he fixed his eyes along the paths that led to the beach. Although they won the battle, it was only a matter of time before another, more numerous swarm arrived to continue their task. He would need to begin preparations for the next attack immediately. Before he could make another move, he was alerted by the distressed voice of Taipu rushing toward him from across the beach.
Captain Jalla, come quick!
Taipu, what is it?
It's Onepu. He's hurt real bad.
Along with all Usselry guards within earshot, Jalla followed Taipu as they sprinted across the beach. Many of those that saw the captain in such a rush followed out of curiosity. He followed Taipu until they came upon Onepu lying inside a crater within the sand, with Nuparu knelt by his side.
What happened to him? Jalla asked.
He took the full force of a strength Krana. His chest cavity has been concaved, and his spinal hose is completely severed. It doesn't look good.
Do something, Nuparu.
I can't. I'm sorry, Taipu. There's just nothing that can be done.
It's all right, Taipu.
Wheezed Onepu.
I have no qualms about this. After all, we won.
Jalla knelt beside him for a closer look.
What if you took him back to Onukoro? We'll arrange an escort and he could be treated there.
Nuparu shook his head.
He wouldn't survive the journey. Moving him would do nothing but cause him more pain.
There's certainly no shortage of that.
There has to be something we can do.
Don't worry, Captain. I suppose a Matoran can only cheat death so many times. This sport will do just fine. My life began on this beach. It's only fitting that it comes to a close here as well. I only wish it were not so terribly bright.
Someone get him some shade.
Is there anything else we can do?
The Chronicler. I would like to speak with the Chronicler.
Jalla firmly clasped Onepu's clawed hand before standing up.
I'll go find him. Everyone else, give them space. We need to start preparing for the next attack.
Takua arrived shortly after a small shelter was pitched to shield Onepu's eyes from the sun. He pulled the Book of Chronicles from his bag and sat down beside the Usselry captain, prepared to write down his final words, a duty he had yet to perform as chronicler.
I have 2 requests upon my passing, Chronicler. The first of which shall be made to Turaga Onewa concerning my replacements.
Of course, Captain.
Damek shall be taking my place as captain of the Usselry. He is an honorable soldier and will make a fine leader. But I wish for the role of right hand to go to another.
Who?
Nuparu. He is ideal for the position. The entire island would benefit from his brilliance. I only wish I had seen that sooner. Nuparu. It must be Nuparu. See to it that the Turaga appoints him.
I will.
My other request is to be asked of you, Chronicler. Puku! Take care of dear Puku. She deserves only the best. She deserves you.
She was the greatest gift I've ever received. I'll make sure she knows that.
I would very much like to see her one last time.
Takua nodded before quickly standing up and stuffing the Book of Chronicles into his bag. He hurried off and returned only a moment later, leading Puku by the reins. Onepu's dimming and weary eyes brightened at the sight of his old crab. Puku carefully approached him and leaned forward, allowing him to weakly lift his hand and gently stroke between her eye stalks. Feeling content, he relaxed his hand and let it slip from her face. As Taipu and many members of the Usselry Guard gathered to his side, Onepu continued to reassure them until his voice faltered and left him entirely. Upon his passing, Puku wept no less than Taipu, while his body was transported back to Onukoro.